I'll get the ball rolling. I'm going to ask Matt. So if I was a client, Matt, I'm not going to ask you the question that you asked me to ask you. I thought about
No, thank you.
If I was a client, I would sit, listen, watch those, and I'd go, they're all absolutely brilliant. There's no question about those being brilliant. But how do I tell in advance? Because I'm sure that somebody at Labour Party headquarters thought that the 8-foot monolith was a genius fame-building idea and was a disaster. So so it's possible to be famous good and famous bad. How do I try and avoid that if I was a client and get famous good?
Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Or anybody.
That's a very good question, like Ed Miliband always says.
Do I get the bottle of champagne?
Yeah. Straight out, you can go now. I think there's two questions implicit in that. One is good versus bad fame, and the other one is, will it be famous at all? I think the good versus bad fame is, in a way, easier to test for, because your gut will tell you, have you got integrity? Is this something that would actually, you feel you could be proud of, and that other people will look at from the outside and go, you're being true to yourself, and frankly, not being an idiot. I think a lot of the issues around the Miliband campaign and so on are probably that they didn't have what I think Bill Clinton had, which is a professional outsider on the team whose job it was to absolutely be the canary in the gold mine, who listened to it and went, hang on guys, outside this room that's going to sound like a terrible idea. You need people, or a person at least.
So to avoid groupthink.
Who will sit outside and not be the groupthink person. And you need to actually have that overtly, and I'm sure people in PR get used to doing that. I think will it be famous at all question is much more in the lap of the gods, and there's inherently a certain amount of randomness, and you can never guarantee that. Anyone who says they can guarantee fame is probably fooling themselves. So, but I think the point is it's a bit like viral. You don't expect to get viral. If you get it, it's a great bonus. But if you have something solid underneath it that is going to work anyway, like we knew Vinny was going to work, that's what you've got to aim for. And if it happens to explode and get really mass takeoff, then that's great too. There's so much randomness in it. People have studied this. What's his name? Duncan Watts, Yahoo Labs, has gone into this in depth, and he says it's basically pretty random whether you become that #1 hit or not.
Hi, I'm Jamie from Chell. You spoke earlier about it kind of being difficult to gain traction with some clients with regards to new planning concepts and things like that, because obviously they can feel quite sold to sometimes. So what would you say to a client who, when you introduce a concept of fame, their response is that fame isn't kind of anything new, but it's something that agencies are kind of packaging and commoditizing because we have the ability to quantify it these days with kind of fancy analytics and things like that? What would the response be to a client?
Yeah, I think it hurt. I mean, I think what's happened is everybody's, whether everyone's always realised, it's always dawned on everyone that the best advertising, and that's why the sort of IPA, studies have been so incredible, because now people can hold up a really rigorous academic study that says being creative and being famous is really effective, and it's like, oh, hallelujah. So I think, we've cottoned onto it, but the best advertisers have always done that. They've always created this work that people liked enough to want to talk about it in their own lives, rather than just in those little interruptive windows in between the other stuff that they liked. So, your Nikes of the world always created little bits of entertainment that they put out and everyone loved and chatted about. I think what's happened now is that we have all these other mechanics that allow us to do it in really, really interesting ways, because we can suddenly, like you say, see what people are actually doing and talking about, and we have all these other platforms. So for me, the whole challenge of it is we've kind of established a currency for how we can establish how visible and how much scale something has and how much people like it. How do we pick up how well we're doing if we're going to use all these other communication tools to achieve that same objective? Because a lot of the currency and the tools we have are quite blunt. For how do you pick up the nuance of the quality of that social interaction or the quality of that piece of culture versus it just being counted as the number of impacts you've got? So I don't think we've solved it at all, actually. I think we need to work really hard to re-establish a currency.
So do you think then that fame this is going to sound, as I am about to say it, I realise it might sound a slightly stupid question, but do you think that fame has to be a mass populist thing, or can fame be something within quite a discrete community? So you're famous, but famous amongst canary canary owners or whatever it is, to pick but one subgroup. But does fame, because in a way the Specsavers example, I mean, that to me, just watching the case study, and that's all I know of it, I mean, that just is the more people in the net, the better.
I mean, yes, that's the absolute. Specsavers are a brand for everyone in the UK, and actually, if you look at our demographics, we pretty much represent everyone who wears glasses. My guess is the other side of that is if your ambitions are niche, if your product is targeting a smaller group of people, it's potentially easier to become famous within a small group than it is within a large group.
But isn't it also the difference between your communications audience and your ultimate consumption audience? So you touched on that before. So there's loads of, theory that we've got out there, the sort of Ehrenberg-Bass theory, that really you just need to make sure that as many, the tipping point is toast, the Dunkin', you just need as many people as possible to have some vague idea of who you are, just to put it in really condensed terms. So in that sense, you ultimately want to be as known, or in the potential consideration set, to as broad audience as possible. But I think that's different to the communication audience, who could be a reasonably small but highly engaged group of people that love what you're doing and desperately want to talk about what you're doing and share it and do all of those things, because they're, it's not the people that you reach, it's the people that they reach ultimately. And that's just a slightly different way of thinking about it.
I think the other thing as well,
Yes,
sorry, just to kind of build on your example with the kind of life-saving spray, it's just if you do have dependent on your product, if it speaks to people like, cyclists or motorcyclists, or people who actually see that that object is keyed into their very identity, then of course you can play into a subgroup of the audience.
So my question for that is, how's that going to sell cars?
It's going to sell cars because there's actually a fantastic overlap between the target audiences. So you go into the numbers of cyclists versus potential Volvo owners. And it's talking to them about safety, which is a Volvo thing, in a way which is new and exciting. And lastly, because the best place to get it is a Volvo dealership.
The can is free, sir, and the car's only £20,000.
So come in and get it and have a look at the cars while they're there.
Very good.
Hello, I'm Ben from M2M. My question relates to the fact that all of us have been talking today about mass appeal more, and like the fact that it's shareable and the people are like fundamentally engaging with it. And I guess my question, especially slightly directed to you, Jenny, would be within this kind of win-win-win-win mantra.
Many wins.
Lots of wins, which is good. But I guess where would the line be drawn between providing a service that people fundamentally need and then tying that in with your brand's value or like core values in itself? Because I'm just thinking kind of, I work on quite a few luxury things, and there's loads of cool ideas that you could say that would make this brand really famous because it's a really good thing that society needs, but actually has nothing to do with super high-end watches, for example. And I guess as a,
Do you mean, can you be famous and yet irrelevant?
I guess I don't know. My question is kind of directing to the fact that maybe fame isn't necessarily the key thing if it kind of alienates your core brand values, I guess. And then where, as experienced planners, where would you draw that line between something that's cool and is super shareable and something which is actually, linked into what?
Can I ask Kat, a specific example is on my mind around that, which maybe is the same. So two Christmas campaigns for Sainsbury's.
Yeah.
So you have the one you showed us here, which is incredible, emotional, exactly on that. And then the following year, we have the First World War, hugely controversial campaign. So they're both famous. Are they both on brand?
I think they are both on brand because they drive out of a belief about Christmas, which is that Christmas is for sharing, which is our point of view about Christmas. I think that one of the things as well about the difference between brand consistency versus brand coherence, and I think that the role for certainly at Christmas is to to kind of reinvent Christmas is for sharing, and as long as it delivered against that point of view, I know that the one last year was very different and very controversial. But the thread that we saw that bound them together was that in the first year we had worked with Kevin McDonald, who was an external creative force, and then this year we worked with the Royal British Legion as well, with the chocolate bar, to raise money for the charity at the heart of it. So, and both of them don't kind of glitzify Christmas and talk about the true meaning of Christmas in very different, admittedly, in very different ways.
Very good. Is that roughly what the question was?
I think, just to add that, I think there's great brands have a sense of their place in the culture anyway. And if you're true to that, you'll be fine. The brands I worry for are the ones that don't have a sense of what their place in the broader social, cultural context is, because they're the ones who are going to find it very hard to keep getting attention and to keep meaning things to people.
So I think that's a great point. So
If I was starting a brand, sorry, but I mean, I mentioned Rafa before because it's a very interesting case, but that was a brand that was started by a guy from Interbrand who knew all of this stuff, and he deliberately started it because it had a community, because it had a cultural value within that community, yada, yada, yada. I think that is the way that people that own brands and start brands need to think. They need to bake it in right from the beginning, because otherwise you're not going to be able to exploit the myriad of new media and social contexts and things that you can get to today.
But just to ask Jenny, that I mean, as an agency that appears to, certainly from what you've described, the agency comes from a sort of a non-traditional background. Is that because there are lots of brands in the maybe as you describe? Does an agency like yours have, if you like, more chance of connecting them or helping them find a
I'm going to go with
home
yes.
if they don't have one?
I'm going to go with definite yes.
And how?
Well, absolutely. Anyone, you're welcome to pick up the phone. Yeah, so I think there's also just the short-term versus long-term as well. Like anyone can be famous, like Daily Mail sidebar, just give you, anyone can be famous for a day if they're prepared to go to certain lengths, but like genuine long-term fame because you're well respected and you're adding value into people's lives is a different thing. So the way that we're specifically made up to help make that happen was that we have lots and lots of people whose background is in the world of culture and entertainment, because like I think someone told me once, it's hard to learn to swim by just reading a book about swimming. So we have people who are documentary filmmakers. The series producer from Horizon is now a permanent member of staff who sits next to me, actually, which is very nice. We have editorial magazine writers whose background is purely on the editorial side who are sort of crossing over. So we have like practitioners in that space, and what we tend to do is put a really eclectic group of people together. Like we don't have departments where people sit in planning or account. We have everybody mixed up together, and then we grab a diverse group of people and we go and sit in a room somewhere and we try and figure it out. And I think it comes from having that breadth of opinion and expertise to look for something that's new, and lots of then network around us of people in whether it be so like the Sky Arts thing that we just talked about, Bailey's, that came out of a relationship that somebody already had with the commissioning editor, which meant that we could have that conversation 10 times more easily than trying to sort of go through a media agency relationship, which would have meant that there was a price tag on it. So yeah, relationships and specialisms.
Hi, I'm Alistair for Rainy Kelly. I just wondered if you thought it was almost inevitable when you're tapping into those themes of huge cultural significance like the First World War, that there's going to provoke some kind of, it's going to polarize opinion. And how do you prepare for that? And is it something that you're even concerned about?
That's one for you.
Yeah.
Unless anybody else has got a World War I themed ad they want.
Yes. Yeah, so I think the big planning challenge on it, strategy challenge on it, was to how you can actually de-risk a potentially very risky idea. And yes, of course, we knew that there was a chance that it would polarise. That's why it was absolutely crucial that we worked in partnership with the Royal British Legion, and we would never have done it had we have not done it in partnership with the Royal British Legion. And actually, last year was a coincidence of not only of the centenary, but also of 20 years of Sainsbury's supporting the Royal British Legion as well. So when we approached it and we had the idea on the table, we were talking to them from the very get-go. And actually, from having their involvement, we thought, okay, well, how can we actually contribute something, use culture to contribute something back to them, which is why originally when the script was written, it didn't have the chocolate bar in it. So we actually then inserted that in there so that we could then sell it in the stores so that all the profits would go to charity. And we raised £500,000 for the Royal British Legion. So the role was about scenario planning for stuff to go right, stuff to go wrong, and to actually a lot of scenario planning to be able to then, when it went live, to be able to respond, manage the debate, the commentary. And actually, I mean, yes, there was some negativity, of course there was going to be, but the sentiment was 94% positive from the general public. And we featured on, you know, editorially on things like, you know, 8 out of 10 cats and, you know, Gogglebox as well.
I think it's a good point, because when you do step into the world of culture and fame, people will judge you on a more profound level than they do if you're just making an ad about, you know, your latest improved formulation. And it's very important that people will judge your motivation right. And that if you're making a comment on things that really do matter to people, rather than just, you know, I've got some new gunk in my shampoo or whatever, that...
Not yours.
Not mine.
Is it Pantene a client?
That they believe that you're actually trying to do the right thing for society, and that underlying it all is a good brand there. And I mean, your question at the beginning about BHF and Vinny, I mean, I think that ad had absolutely ironclad credentials because it was coming from the BHF. I think if it was coming from, you know, pick someone else you like or don't like, more to the point, it wouldn't have been the same, even if it was exactly the same piece of film. And people will judge that the minute that you presume to be in fame in culture. So I think you've got to watch for that.
You're right to say it, almost.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. Do you have the right?
What gives so for example, so what gives Sainsbury's the right to say this? Well, that's the. That's
you had the chocolate bar, and that gave you the right to talk about it. Without that, it would have been
the Royal British Legion.
Yeah, and I think with these things, you have to be completely authentic, and it's probably a lot of the discussion that we've been having here. So not just ripping off culture, actually contributing to it and giving something back that people can riff off, and that's when you get an energy, and when it kind of takes on, you know, a energy of its own, and people take it on. Because I think one of the other biggest things about a fame campaign is being able to leave some space for people to contribute and be able to hand over the reins for them to be able to, you know, shape it themselves.
But if it's any good, it will attract the negativity as well, because there's people with axe to grind. I mean, I remember when Unilever came under fire for owning both Dove and Axe, you know, and there was a lot of chat about that at one point. And what was amazing was the amount of people that came out and went, well, hang on, they're trying to do the right thing with Dove. They are actually on the right side. They may not be perfect, but look, this is good. So stop hassling them. And that was because they were judged in people's minds as actually being a company that was trying to do the right thing overall. But you have to, if people suspect your motivations, then you're going to get in trouble.
Time for a couple more? Yes.
Jack Millington from Ferrif. We were talking a lot about polarising opinion and fame and everything. And I had a question that relates to something that's been in the news quite a lot recently, and that's Protein World and Are You Beachbody Ready? And I really just wanted to see what your opinion of that is. I mean, arguably, for the target audience, it's good and they like it, but it's annoyed a lot of people. So I just wanted to see, is that something that you'd recommend to approach to take, and general thoughts on it, really?
Okay, quick answer from all the panel. Okay, Matt, wade in. Careful.
Very unintentional fame approach. they quite just did a couple of $100,000 advertising, and it is the strength of how you can build fame in the modern world. It can ladder up like that instantly overnight, and suddenly millions more people than would ever have heard of this company have suddenly heard about it. And I think I saw a report in the news that they'd sold 4,000. They had 4,000 more customers off the back of just the social media sentiment. I think the reality is those posters will be down this week, next week, and no one will remember them tomorrow. It's a great example of you can be famous for 15 minutes. It's Andy Warhol all over again. Yeah. The real task, the real kind of core commitment for I think us as planners, as advertisers, as content creators, is to create a long-lasting approach. So something that people remember And I think, as we said before, people remember it for the right reasons.
And
Run it, Kat?
yeah, I mean, I think that it was, you know, it turned out to be something controversial and, you know, famous for all the wrong reasons. And certainly as a woman, I was really affronted by it. I thought it just wasn't quite offensive, actually. Are you Beachbody ready? I just thought, fuck you. Most of us aren't. Or, you know, certainly, you know, was she airbrushed? She'd got the big, you know, thigh gap and just kind of, you know, it just, everything that advertising shouldn't be. And so what's their, you know, kind of run-up going to be? Absolutely, as Chris said.
What do you think it was about that? Because because advertising is full of women in bikinis. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
What do you think it was particularly about that
I think
mean,
because it
that just
said,
caught,
you know,
I mean, it was a storm, wasn't it?
But it was almost accusatory. You know, are you Beachbody ready? And then, you know, you're standing at the, you know, the platform on the tube, feeling a bit bleary-eyed in the morning. You know, probably just got out of bed.
Planner's fault, really.
Maybe a little bit. But also, it was just so, yeah. It was how personal.
I was just reasonably bewildered about why it became such a big thing. Because if you go, like, any gym is full of things like that, and it's not just the women. There's ones of like men with like super ripped six packs that you can dwell upon that sort of talk about whether you've got your stack sorted. I don't know. They're like everywhere. So for some reason, this particular execution, which is really similar to loads of other ones, captured the people's imagination. Like, again, I can assume it must cultural context of the time. We are in a, you know, a super brilliant wave of kind of new feminism, and people are becoming a lot more aware of things. So I think in perfect storm of moments in time, it probably would have just passed under the radar, apart from right now, and then suddenly it got, you know, shot up in the air and everyone talked about it. But it's not that different to a lot of other stuff that's out there.
I think there is a big difference in the context of being in a gym when you're thinking about your actively working on your body versus
but there's posters like that I see all the time with people with the not a right lot on.
I want to thank you all very much for coming, and I particularly want to thank the panel, Jenny, Matt, Kat, thank you, and Matt. It rhymes with Matt. And Matt, thank you for coming along. So I'd like to give them a round of applause. And